Daniel Carter opened his eyes to a soft glow that seemed to come from nowhere. For a long moment, he could not tell if he was asleep or awake. The air around him shimmered faintly, like the surface of a calm lake struck by moonlight. He tried to sit up, and his body groaned in protest, every muscle heavy as if he had been carried across the weight of the stars. He remembered the storm. He remembered the way fire danced over the edge of the vessel Aurora's edge, tearing at metal and splitting the sky with strange colors. There was a shockwave, a flash, and then nothing. The thought crept into his mind that maybe he was dead. Maybe this soft glowing chamber was heaven or something like it. But when he touched the surface beneath him, it was cold, smooth, and very real. His eyes adjusted. He was lying on a pale silver floor that curved upward into walls of glass and metal. The room was round, like being inside the heart of a crystal. Everything shone with quiet energy. Though he could not see any lamps or light fixtures, the space glowed gently, steady, and calm. Daniel staggered to his feet. His boots rang faintly against the floor. The air was breathable, warmer than space should ever allow. He ran his hand across the wall, amazed at the way it pulsed under his touch like a heartbeat. He was not alone. A voice spoke from the far end of the chamber. It was steady, warm, and commanding, and he felt it cut through his chest, like a sudden spark. Daniel spun around and saw her. She was seated upon a throne built high into the curve of the chamber, her figure cloaked in flowing robes of white trimmed with silver threads that shimmered in the glow. A crown rested upon her head, simple yet radiant like a line of stars caught in her hair. She was young enough to carry strength in every movement, but carried herself with the authority of someone who had ruled for longer than he had lived. Her eyes fixed on him, calm yet searching. For a heartbeat he said nothing. His throat felt dry. He had heard stories of explorers and noble rulers in the old tales, but he never thought he would stand before one. The queen leaned forward slightly, her voice echoing across the chamber, soft yet filled with presence. "Are you lonely, human?" Daniel felt his chest tighten at the words. Out of all the things she could have asked, out of all the questions about his name, his purpose, or how he had ended up here, she asked if he was lonely. Lonely. It was such an unexpected question that for a moment he forgot his fear. No ruler had ever spoken to him. Yet this one had looked through him, past his torn uniform, past the sweat still clinging to his forehead, and into something deeper, struggled for words. He had been alone when the storm scattered him from his ship, had been afraid that he would die in empty space. He had wondered if anyone would even remember him, or if the universe would swallow him whole. Perhaps she was right to ask. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He lowered his eyes, embarrassed, yet he could feel her gaze still upon him, patient and steady. "Do you know where you stand?" she asked again, her voice softer this time. Daniel shook his head. "You stand within a hall of my people," she said. "A place kept far from the noise of earth. You are not the first human to lose himself in the stars. But you are the first to stand before me in many, many years." Each word she spoke seemed to carry more than its sound. It carried a weight of memory, of lives lived, and promises kept. Daniel lifted his head to meet her eyes again. They were not cold as he expected, not distant or cruel. They were alive, bright with curiosity, like a torch lit in a dark and endless cave. She leaned forward even more, her hand resting on the arm of her throne, and asked again, as if to press into the truth of his very being, "Are you lonely, human?" His throat trembled. 1,000 answers swirled in his chest. He wanted to say no, to stand proud, to show bravery before this queen. But the truth pressed harder. He was lonely. He had been lonely for years, even before the storm and the silence of space. And for the first time in his life, someone had asked him what he had never admitted to himself. Daniel breathed in slowly. And though his voice cracked when he spoke, he finally answered her. "Yes, I am lonely." The queen said nothing in return, not yet, but her lips curved faintly into the kind of smile that no light could imitate. She had pulled the truth from him without effort, and in that moment, Daniel understood he had stepped into a story far larger than the storm that carried him here, and it had only just begun. Daniel stood in silence, his words still hanging in the air. The queen watched him as though she had been waiting a lifetime for that simple answer. The chamber seemed quieter than before, as if even the walls listened to the exchange. Then, without looking away from him, she raised her hand. From the shadows beyond the chamber, several men appeared. Their footsteps made sharp sounds on the floor as they drew closer. They wore long silver robes that shimmered faintly, and each carried themselves with a kind of discipline that made Daniel tense. One of them, tall and broad, with dark hair pulled behind his head, gave Daniel a cold look. His name was William, a man of the court whose loyalty to the Queen was matched only by his suspicion of outsiders. He spoke quickly, his voice strong. "My Queen, this man does not belong here. He comes from Earth. He is a stranger. We do not know his purpose, and we cannot trust him." Daniel felt the weight of those words pressed down on him. Another man stepped forward, younger and leaner, his eyes sharp like steel. His name was Samuel, and he added his voice. "He should not stand here before you. He is weak. He is lost. He has no right to speak to you as if you were an equal." Daniel's chest tightened. He could not argue. He was weak. He was lost. Everything about their words was true, yet the Queen did not turn him away. Instead, her voice rose above the chamber, calm and clear. "He is here because the storm brought him to me, not by choice, but by fate, and I decide who may stand before me, not you." The men lowered their eyes, though Daniel could feel their anger still rising, like smoke in the air. The Queen stood, her robe flowing down the steps of her throne. With every step she took toward him, Daniel felt both smaller and braver at once. She stopped only a few steps away, her presence filling the space. "Do you know who I am, Daniel?" she asked. He swallowed hard and shook his head. "I am Eleanor," she said, her voice steady. "I am the Queen of this empire, built far above the worlds below. We have hidden ourselves from Earth so that we may grow without the endless wars and endless grief your people carried across the stars." Her words struck him. To think there were people of his own blood, people of his own history who had left Earth, who had grown in secret, who now lived under her rule. Eleanor's eyes held his again. "Your people fight for land, for power, for pride. They scatter themselves until they forget what binds them together. But here, we have stayed united." And yet, she paused, her voice softening. "For all this unity, I find myself surrounded by silence." The men exchanged uneasy glances, but the Queen ignored them. "Tell me, Daniel, what has become of Earth? Tell me what your people live for now. Tell me what keeps them alive." Daniel blinked. Of all the questions she could have asked, she asked for stories. He searched his mind, and for the first time since the storm, he felt something stir inside him. He began to speak. He told her of the cities still standing, their skylines filled with steel and glass, though shadowed by smoke. He spoke of families who held on to each other in the middle of despair, of children who laughed while watching ships launch into the sky. He described people sharing meals in crowded rooms, workers carrying burdens together, lovers who kissed before the long journeys into space. His words were simple, but the Queen listened, as if each was a jewel she had not seen before. Her eyes never left him, and for a moment her stern face softened into something almost human, almost uncertain. The men shifted uncomfortably, but they could not stop him. For the Queen had asked, and Daniel gave her the truth. When he finished, a long silence filled the chamber. Then Eleanor turned to her court. "Do you see?" she said quietly. "This man carries something you do not. Not strength of arms, not riches, but memory. He carries the heart of what our people once were." William and Samuel lowered their gazes, but Daniel felt their anger burn deeper beneath their silence. The Queen turned back to him, her eyes searching. "Tell me more. Tell me everything." Daniel felt his heartbeat race. For the first time since the storm, he felt that he had been brought here for a reason, not to die, not to vanish, but to remind even a queen what it meant to be human. Daniel stayed in the Queen's hall for many days. Time seemed to pass more slowly in that place, where the walls glowed gently and the high windows opened to skies filled with drifting towers. He was given a small room overlooking the floating spires, and food that was unlike anything he had seen yet tasted, as though it had been made for him alone. He should have felt like a prisoner, but there were no locks on his doors, no guards in the hallway. It's only watchful eyes from a distance, and whispers that followed his steps. Each day, Eleanor asked for him, and each day he came to stand before her. She sat upon her throne with her men clustered around her in silence, their arms folded, their eyes sharp. William never trusted him, and Samuel looked as though he wanted to see him cast out at once. But whenever Daniel opened his mouth, whenever he began to speak of Earth, the queen silenced those doubts with nothing more than a raised hand. She asked him about simple things. I asked what mothers told their children when they were afraid of the night. She wanted to know how people celebrated when they married, how they buried their dead, how they remembered their friends who had gone away. Daniel answered as best he could. He spoke of lullabies sung softly in dark rooms, of flowers placed on graves, of rings slipped onto fingers with trembling hands. As she listened, the stern lines of Eleanor's face softened again and again. The men shifted, restless, but could not turn her attention away. Oh. She was hungry for his tales, hungry for what he carried in his mind. And Daniel, though uncertain of why she wanted them, gave her everything he could remember. One night, long after the hall had emptied, she asked him to stay. He followed her to the high balcony where the city lay stretched in silver light, the spires shining like sharp crystals. Winds rushed past them, carrying the faint hum of engines that held the towers aloft. She rested a hand on the rails and looked at the stars above. Do they still dream? She asked. Daniel turned to her, unsure of what to say. Who? Your people? She said softly. Do they still dream of better lives? Do they still dream of touching the stars with their own hands? He thought of the men and women he grew up with, the stories of workers building ships, not for glory, but for food, the children who spoke of flying away from dirt and hunger. He nodded. Yes, they still dream. They never stopped. The queen breathed slowly, almost with relief. For a long moment she stood in silence, her crown catching the starlight. Daniel watched her face, and for the first time, he noticed how tired her eyes were. She was surrounded by thousands of loyal subjects, yet she looked lonelier than he had ever felt. He gathered the courage to speak. You rule all of this. You hold power. How can you still feel alone? Her gaze lingered on the distant night. Loneliness does not come from being without people, she said. It comes from being without equals. No one speaks with me as you do. No one dares. There, they look at me and see a queen. They do not see Eleanor. His chest tightened. He had not thought she would share something so personal. He wanted to reply, but her eyes met his again and held him still. For the first time, he felt that she needed him not because of his strength, not because of his knowledge, but because he treated her as more than a throne. In the days that followed, their secret walks continued. They spoke less of Earth and more of themselves. He told her of his youth, the small town by the ocean where the water always smelled of salt and iron. He told her about nights spent staring at the stars, dreaming of escape. She, in return, told him about her early years, about how quickly she had been crowned, about how every word from her lips had been measured and weighed, about how heavy her crown felt even when it rested on a small table beside her bed. But not everyone turned a blind eye to their closeness. William began to spread quiet warnings to those who served in the hall. Emil whispered that Daniel aimed to twist the queen's heart, that he sought to weaken the empire's core. More and more eyes followed Daniel's back as he crossed the halls, less with curiosity now, and more with sharp suspicion. He knew danger was rising, could see it in the way guards stiffened when he passed, in the narrowed glances of men who once ignored him. Something was building behind their silence, something heavy, yet he also knew something else. For all the risk, for all the fear that each moment might bring his end, he saw something changing in Eleanor's gaze. For the first time in years, perhaps in her entire rule, there was warmth in her eyes. She had found someone who dared to remind her she was more than a ruler, more than a crown. And Daniel, standing there among strangers, felt that his loneliness was slowly breaking apart. Daniel's bond with the queen grew stronger, but so did the unease in the hall. Whispers moved through the corridors like shadows, and every day more eyes watched him with suspicion. William no longer hid his anger, and Samuel's voice carried from corner to corner as he spoke against the stranger who had captured the queen's attention. One morning, Daniel entered the chamber to find a line of guards waiting for him. Their armor gleamed in the pale light, and their hands rested on their long blades. William stood at the front, his face hard as stone. You do not belong here, William said firmly. Your words are poison, and your presence is a danger to this empire. You will face judgment for speaking too freely and breaking the order of this court. Daniel's stomach clenched. He looked toward the throne, but Eleanor had not yet arrived. He stood alone in the center of the chamber, the guards slowly closing in around him. Samuel stepped forward, his eyes burning with triumph. Your stories may fool her, but they do not fool us. You speak of Earth as if it were filled with love and light. But we know the truth. Earth is broken. Your people crawl through the stars like beggars. You are here to weaken us, to break our queen, and we will not allow it. Daniel wanted to answer, but his throat felt tight. He could see their hands moving closer to their weapons. He could hear the growing rhythm of boots in the corridor, more soldiers coming to surround him. For the first time since he had arrived, fear returned like a weight pressing against his back. The queen entered the hall at that moment. Her robe swept across the silver floor, and her eyes narrowed as she saw what was unfolding. At once the guards slowed and lowered their heads, but William kept his ground. My queen, William said, bowing slightly. This man has grown bold. He twists stories to catch your ear, and weakens you with soft words. You must be judged. Eleanor looked at Daniel, and for the first time her gaze showed the strain of doubt. She had listened to him night after night, but now the voices of her court pressed against her. She turned her eyes upon him, waiting as if to hear what truth he would choose. Daniel took a deep breath. His chest was shaking, but his voice grew stronger than he expected when he began to speak. I will not deny that Earth is broken, he said. It is true. We have war. We have hunger. We fail each other again and again. But that is not the whole story. On Earth, even in the middle of loss, we still share what little we have. We still sing when there is nothing else left. We still love when everything around us falls apart. We are broken, yes. But it is in the middle of that brokenness that we find what matters most. That is why I tell you these things. Because strength is not the silence of fear or the armor of suspicion. Strength is when lonely lives join together and refuse to give up. The hall fell silent. His words drifted like steady fire through the air. Some lowered their eyes. Others clenched their fists. William only grew colder, his jaw tight. Samuel sneered. You hear a speech, Samuel said bitterly, but I hear the voice of a traitor. Before anyone could move further, Eleanor raised her hand. The sound of her voice cut sharply through the hall. Enough, she said. Her eyes lingered on Daniel, and her voice softened. You may not carry strength in your body, Daniel, but there is strength in your heart. And it is a strength that this hall has long forgotten. Murmurs ran through the men, but none dared to argue. The queen's word was final. Still, the look in William's eyes told Daniel this was not the end. He had escaped judgment today, but the anger of the court would not so easily die. Later, Eleanor summoned him again to the balcony while the city slept beneath them. The wind moved around them, carrying the hum of towers. She looked at him and spoke quietly, but her words cut deeper than any blade. You stood today without fear, she said. You showed them what they could not see. Yet be careful, Daniel. My trust protects you, but their anger grows stronger each day. This cord is like a fire. If you move too close, it will burn you. But if you step away, you will lose me. Her eyes searched his face, heavy with honesty. Daniel nodded slowly. Then I will not step away. The queen's lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes still carried both sorrow and hope. Beneath the silver stars, Daniel felt the weight of choice press upon him. For the first time, he was no longer only a lost wanderer who had stumbled into her world. Now he was a spark in the middle of an empire, and sparks could either bring light or burn everything into ash. The days after Daniel's trial passed slowly, like the pause before a storm. The queen still called him to her side, but each meeting drew sharper looks from the men of her court. Samuel's sneer grew bolder with each passing hour, and William's voice pressed heavier in the hall. Behind closed doors, Daniel sometimes heard the faint echo of men arguing. Their words carried through walls of metal and glass. He knew something was coming. He felt it in every glance that followed him down the corridors. In the cold silence when he crossed the dining hall, in the sudden stop of whispers when he entered a room. Even the guards who once looked simply curious now stood taller, their eyes hard, their steps precise. One evening he was summoned not by the queen but by soldiers. They took him through a tall doorway into a long chamber where the ceiling stretched like the curve of the sky. At the far end stood William and Samuel, their faces grim. Rows of men in silver stood on either side, a silent wall of judgment. You have gone too far, Samuel declared. Your words have weakened the queen. She listens to you more than she listens to her council. This cannot continue. Daniel's heart pounded, but he stood straight. I have not weakened her, he said. I have reminded her of what makes her strong. Samuel laughed, sharp and bitter. Strong? You speak like a child. This empire is strong because we are united, because we silence voices that do not belong. And tonight, your voice will be silenced. The soldiers moved closer, but the sound of another voice stopped them, firm, commanding, yet steady as still water. Who dares decide this without my word? The great doors opened. The queen entered in her flowing robe, her crown glowing faint in the torchlight. Each soldier lowered his head, but Samuel's jaw tightened. William stepped forward, bowing, his face still stern. My queen, William said carefully, this man is a danger. He twists hearts. He speaks too freely. The council is chosen. The council? Eleanor's voice cut him off. Do you forget who rules here? Do you forget who wears the crown? Silence filled the chamber. Even Samuel faltered for a moment. The queen walked past her men and stopped before Daniel. Her eyes locked with his, and he remembered the very first words she had spoken to him in the glowing hall. Are you lonely, human? She whispered, though this time her voice carried to every corner of the chamber. Daniel's throat tightened, but he no longer felt the weight of shame. He answered firmly, without fear, not anymore. A hush swept across the chamber. The words struck deeper than any defense he could have given. In those few simple sounds, every soldier heard the truth. The queen was no longer alone, and that truth frightened her men more than any weapon. William spoke again, desperate. My queen, if you let him stand, you will lose the order we have built. You will risk everything. Eleanor turned to him. The order you speak of has no heart. It burns bright but cold. What good is an empire without warmth? What good is a throne without understanding? Her words hung in the air like fire. No one dared answer. She reached for Daniel's hand, lifting it before the eyes of all. This man is not here by accident. He carries what we have forgotten, carries the voice of every life on earth that still dares to dream. And I will not lose that voice. Not now, not ever. Daniel felt the queen's hand in his, warm and steady. For the first time, he understood the weight of her crown, and for the first time, she shared it with him. The men of the hall lowered their eyes, some in shame, others in reluctant obedience. But the decision was made. No sword would strike that night. The storm in their hearts had been met with a fire greater than fear. Later, when the hall was empty and night stretched across the skies, Daniel and Eleanor stood once more on her balcony. The towers shimmered around them, endless and still, held aloft by the power of ages. The queen looked at him, her voice low. You spoke your truth when death stood before you. That truth is what I searched for all these years. Not flattery, not silence, but honesty that carries the weight of being human. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time he smiled without hesitation. And you are no longer alone. She returned his smile, a rare and quiet one that shone more brightly than the crown upon her head. In that moment, both knew their lives had changed forever. Daniel had entered her empire as a stranger, broken and afraid. But now he stood by her side, no longer lost, no longer lonely. Together they would carry what no throne nor fleet could build, alone the simple strength of connection, the fire that kept humanity alive even in the endless night. And for the first time, the Queen's empire felt alive again.